All right, guys, we are up to topic 4.7 now, expanding democracy. We are over halfway done with period 4 already, and today we're going to focus on how elections and democracy itself is changing in America in the mid-1800s. So let's look at how democracy expanded between 1800 and 1848. Sometimes this time period is known as the rise of the common man. Rise of the common man, also known as the Jacksonian era or Jacksonian democracy. And Andrew Jackson will be a big topic as we go through this lesson, but also a little bit in the future. All right, let's get some more voters out there. So the old way of doing things, of course, is there were some pretty strict requirements on who could vote. There were religious requirements or property requirements, and those are slowly eliminated, or at least reduced anyways, depending on the state. And so this offers up more voice to the people. It also opens up new doors. So now political offices are going to be opened up to the middle class and even the working class. Men are being elected into office, some of which, would have never dreamed of being elected just a generation before. And you can see the difference, guys. 1800, 1830, things like property qualifications, very common, and then only in a few states down here. Taxpayer qualifications, in other words, you have to pay your taxes. That's about the only major requirement we're going to see by 1830. And then even in some states by 1830, universal white male suffrage. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you're white male, rich or poor, you can vote. That's a big step forward. And you can see the effect of this. So what this graph shows us is the percentage of eligible voters who are actually voting, depending on these presidential elections. And you can see by the mid-1840s, the numbers are astounding. Nearly or above 80% eligible voters. We don't have numbers anywhere near that in modern elections. Our numbers are usually closer to this in the modern day. All right, now, how do we get our candidates chosen? So the old way of doing things was party bosses behind the scenes would choose the candidates and then present them to the people. The new way of doing this is you would have these big meetings called nominating conventions, and their nominees would be chosen by a large population present. So basically, they would hold like an election of sorts here, and then they would choose the nominee for the party. This was seen as far more democratic because it gives more people a voice in who will be the nominee of those parties. All right, well, let's now talk about campaigning. So the old way is that the phrase was, the office seeks the man. A good example of this would think about George Washington. George Washington did not hold any campaign rallies. He didn't, hand out buttons, vote for George or something. Rather, people sought him to be the president. That was seen as the dignified way of running for an election. But the new way of doing things, now we have more democracy and expanded voter base, it's that the man seeks the office. This is far more familiar to us. The idea that you go out, you make speeches, you shake hands, you pass out leaflets, you have campaign songs, posters. You are seeking the office rather than the office seeking you. That's the new way of doing things. Now, that means if you are having to win over a lot of people that used to not vote, you have to learn how to speak to the commoners. And so politicians, particularly those from upper classes, realized pretty quickly that to sort of identify with those lower class people, you would have to dress a certain way, act a certain way. You might want to kind of slow down your talk and talk a little bit more common. You might want to throw a couple double negatives in there. You might even dress a little shabbily, just to appear more identifiable to the working class. And we still see this in politicians today. One of the things that always I find amusing is when politicians do this. The rolling up the sleeves, right? This is their way of showing that they're hardworking and they're ready to get down to work because they've got those sleeves rolled up, and they think that is going to sort of resonate with you, the voter. Like, oh yeah, he's just like me. He rolls up his sleeves and gets work done. So again, we still do this stuff today. All right, now, election of 1828, we've got the incumbent, John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams. He's running for election. His challenger is the guy who nearly beat him in 1824, Andrew Jackson. Notice they're both basically the same party, just different wings of the same party, because this is the era of good feelings, right? We only have that one party, the Republican Party. So Jackson's followers are trying to paint him as this champion of the common man. This guy who rose up from poverty, who had very little education, but through hard work, determination, and grit, he had risen through the ranks and become a general and a statesman and just, kind of an example of the American success story. His nickname was Old Hickory, because Hickory, of course, is a very tough, hard wood, and Jackson was supposed to be just as tough as Hickory. They're going to paint John Quincy Adams as this aristocratic, aloof, sort of out-of-touch guy sitting on a throne, looking down contemptuously at the people. And so that's kind of the message of this campaign. Vote for a real guy, Jackson, not this aristocrat, John Quincy Adams. Now, was Andrew Jackson a common man? Well, he did have a very humble beginning. There's no doubt about that. But by this point in his life, he's not living in a shack, okay? He's not living in a log cabin. He's living at a mansion in Nashville called the Hermitage. In fact, the only cabins on the grounds would have been the enslaved people at the Hermitage. Nonetheless, John Quincy Adams loses by a wide margin, and you can see Jackson wins most of the states. There's still some skepticism up here in the Northeast, sort of the former stomping grounds of the Federalists. There's still a little bit of kind of that feeling up there, but Jackson wins the day big time. And his inauguration goes down as probably the most exciting inauguration ever. Not the speech, but what happens afterwards. So thousands and thousands of people who are supporting Andrew Jackson pour into Washington, D.C. They're a rowdy bunch who are very happy to see one of their own in the office. Many of them are frankly drunk. They open up the White House to the commoners to kind of come in and look around, and they just start ransacking the place, stealing silverware, taking souvenirs by ripping down curtains, and Andrew Jackson had to sneak out the back and basically run for his life. Eventually, as the story goes, they're able to lure the people out of the White House by putting big tubs of spiked punch on the front lawn. And once the people left to go get the punch, they shut the doors. All right, so now that Andrew Jackson is in charge, let's look at how he affects politics. And this brings us to something called the spoils system, which takes its name from a senator from New York who said, "To the victor belong the spoils of the enemy." So the spoils system is pretty simple. All you're doing is you are rewarding your political supporters with a job in the government, with public office, in other words. So if you had helped me get elected, maybe you handed out pamphlets, maybe you wrote a speech, maybe you were like a local precinct boss turning out the vote or something, you might get a job in the government as a result. So you're exchanging service for job. Now, on the positive side, this spoils system would bring in fresh people to the government. So you're going to have a new perspective because we've got a lot more middle and lower class people in the government now. It's no longer just jobs filled by elites. So new blood, right? We're going to have a new, fresh perspective in the government. That's something Andrew Jackson certainly felt was important. On the downside, though, there's something kind of unseemly about basically just trading a job for political service. In other words, you're not filling the jobs based on competency or honesty. You're filling it just based on political loyalty. And in some cases, what you would have is some people who are appointed to these jobs who are totally unqualified, some of them downright dishonest. They're going to steal money from the government, but they had been a supporter of Andrew Jackson, so they got the job anyways. And another negative would be if you're constantly, putting new people into office every time there's an election, you have this constant turnover, which means when you have a new president, you have this big learning curve where the government is just kind of feeling its way around, trying to figure out what it's doing, and that's really not something you want to do every 4 or 8 years. All right, now we're going to talk about a new political party. The era of good feelings is going to be over with the birth of the Whig Party. So, who are Whigs? What are they all about? Well, Whigs came from all kinds of different backgrounds. Some of them were supporters of the American system. Some of them were merchants and industrialists from the North. Many of them believed in a national bank. Henry Clay, as you can see, Mr. American System himself, Mr. Great Compromiser himself, would be an example of a Whig. He's kind of like the main face of the Whig Party. So what you see is Whigs come from all kinds of different backgrounds, have all different agendas, but the one thing they have in common is just disdain of Andrew Jackson. The Whig Party really is the anti-Jackson party. That is where it gets its birth. And I gotta say, it really says something about you that you are so unpopular with some people that they literally create an entire new political party just to oppose you. I mean, that really says something about Andrew Jackson and in the anger he stirs up in a lot of people. All right, now Andrew Jackson serves his 2 terms, and then his hand-chosen successor was his vice president, Martin Van Buren. And you can see we've got 2 political parties here. The Democrats, we're going to call this party now, and the Whigs. And who's going to win this election? Well, this is the era of the common man, so whoever can look the most common will get the presidency probably. Now, the Whigs don't really have a platform other than we hate Jackson. But that, again, Jackson's gone at this point. So now you have to transfer that anger towards Martin Van Buren, and that's really not going to be very effective. And so they're kind of floundering until their Democratic rivals make a big miscalculation. Democrats tried to portray William Henry Harrison as this rustic old farmer who lives in a log cabin and drinks hard cider. He's like this, hillbilly from the sticks who just, he just doesn't know what he's doing. He's just this old simpleton. Now, think about this, guys. At this time period, where do a lot of Americans live? In log cabins. And what might they want to drink? Hard cider. So the Democrats really miscalculate because what they're doing is they're offending many voters in America. And so the Whigs take this on. They're like, yeah, that's right. Our guy does live in a log cabin and drinks hard cider, just like our voters. Now, of course, the reality is William Henry Harrison did not live in a log cabin, of course. And I don't believe there's any evidence he drank a lot of hard cider either. But remember, this is the era of the common man, so what they're trying to do is contrast Van Buren as this aristocrat, this out-of-touch, aloof figure, kind of like what happened with John Quincy Adams in 1828. That's what's going to happen to Van Buren. He's this out-of-touch guy who's not a commoner like William Henry Harrison. Right? To the log cabin, boys. That's their slogan. You can see log cabin everywhere, right? Our Ohio farmer, he's just a simple guy like us. There's William Henry Harrison with his log cabin and hard cider. There's Mr. Martin Van Buren there, looking not so well. He's kind of about to get run over, it looks like. There is Martin Van Buren with his beautiful goblet of White House champagne. And here he is with his ugly mug of log cabin hard cider. Right? So the aristocrat and the common man here, he doesn't like what common people drink. Right? So 1, 2, there we go. Yep. All right, let's look at the results. William Henry Harrison wins. You can see the popular vote does pretty well, 53 to 47. And the electoral vote, he does extremely well, 80% of the electoral votes. He wins pretty handily. Now, of course, William Henry Harrison will go on to serve only about 30 days in office. He'll be having the shortest term ever, as he contracted pneumonia almost immediately and will die shortly thereafter. But that's a story for a later day. So, we covered the expansion of democracy, guys, from 1800 to 1848. We're talking about lowering requirements to vote and hold office. We looked at things like party nomination conventions. We talked about the rise of the common man through Andrew Jackson. We looked at the spoils system, which is a big takeaway, guys. Definitely look back over the spoils system. You'll see a question or two about that. I have a lot of confidence. And then we also looked at this idea of politicians wanting to be a little bit more kind of identifiable to their new voters. They have to blend in and act like the common man if they want the vote of the common man.